What's up, Game Boys and Girls? Big T here, back with another video, and this video is about the increasing kind of fervor, the anti-Nintendo sentiment that is sweeping the nation, or at least YouTube. And people will, automatically think this is some kind of defensive video. If you believe that, then you haven't watched my channel, like, ever. Because I criticize Nintendo a lot, much to the chagrin of a lot of my subscribers. But when I criticize them, it's from a place of a fan, and I'm always trying to be fair in my criticisms. Some people still disagree with that. There's some people just outright don't think they deserve any criticism, and I just think that's kind of insane. But I think I'm fair. And as you guys have known, you've seen, I think the Nintendo Switch 2 has gotten more hate than even like the Wii U. Like it's very strange. And I think it's Terrell actually brought this up in the podcast, Juice's Zoo podcast. Make sure you go subscribe to Terminator Juice's channel so you can catch our podcast. Angle that I didn't really think about much, but it was probably in my subconscious, based on my previous kind of analysis of things, Nintendo, is that there is a fear of Nintendo, and I think I've said this before when I was talking about the GameCube specifically, but he laid bare that I think there's a fear within the industry that Nintendo being successful and getting those third-party games that everybody else has, there's a fear around that. I think that's true. There's also kind of a not envy, but there's kind of a resentment about how Nintendo operates today, where the other third-party companies are kind of going, other third-party companies. Maybe that's a little Freudian slip there. The other of the big hardware manufacturers, big gaming companies like Microsoft with Xbox and Sony with PlayStation, they're kind of doing a third-party thing, and a certain segment of the gaming population, mostly the PC gamers, applaud that. They love that, and they resent the fact that Nintendo basically hasn't done that. They don't like the fact that they have to buy Nintendo hardware to play Nintendo games. I understand wanting to be able to have Nintendo games on your PC, but you're not entitled to them. And I think a lot of times people use entitlement wrong. I think it's correct in this sentiment, is that I don't expect to go into McDonald's and pick up a not quarter pounder. Of course you get a quarter pounder. I don't expect to go into McDonald's and expect to pick up go into Burger King, expect to pick up a Big Mac there, right? You go to their building, you go to Burger King's building to buy the Whopper, and you go to McDonald's building, or buildings, obviously, to buy a Big Mac or whatever else you like there. Nobody thinks that's anti-consumer, that you can't buy a Whopper at McDonald's and vice versa, a Big Mac at Burger King. It's very much the same when it comes to any product, right? Certain stores only have certain stores have certain brands, and that's not anti-consumer either. That's just the way business works. And when Nintendo does that, hey, you want to play Nintendo games, you got to come to our building, you got to buy our hardware, or anybody. Sony doing that. Or Microsoft doing that up until recently. That has been okay. That's just how business works. If you want Mac OS, you have to buy a Mac. Now, obviously, on PC, it's a lot more open. You can buy any kind of PC and use Windows. I don't know why you would use Windows if you don't have to. I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's just how business works. It's always been that way. And so, for people to say it's anti-consumer when that's not allowed, it's not everything just free. But even then, what if I'm a console gamer and I don't want a gaming PC? That's not my thing. sure, I still have to buy um, the hardware, but if I want to play PC games, there are games that are on PC that aren't anything else. And I know you guys will say, well, we don't mind. Obviously you don't. Um, but the fact that you would think that everything has to come to PC, I don't know. I think that's a little odd to me. Um, uh, Specifically when it comes to gaming. Obviously, there's certain programs that won't run on certain types of systems. You know, there's, like I just said, Mac OS, right? And I'm sure they frown on that as well. I think this anti Nintendo sentiment is not fair. Again, I criticize Nintendo all the time. I think Mario Kart World being $80 is a joke. I don't think it's should be cost that. I don't like, and I criticize. I did it for Wii U or for Wii U ports to Switch, how they were full price. I didn't like that at all, and I talked about that in multiple videos. I criticized it for that, and I didn't partake. By the way, I also put my money where my mouth is. I didn't buy those games. The only one I did buy was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe because you got everything in that package. I like the fact that all the DLC that I bought on the Wii U version was just on the cart, right? So that's an incentive for me to buy it. They also added an extra item for you to carry, and they added like a real battle mode, you know, and those things are all huge, and new characters as well that are only in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So for me, that one made sense. And obviously, that was the only Mario Kart game we had for the entire generation. Fantastic Mario Kart game. But I partake in nuance. I don't just overall just hate something because there's a few things I don't like about it. I try to be fair in my critique. I just think there's a lot of there's just a lot of outright lying, misinformation when it comes to Nintendo. Specifically with the Switch 2. And like I said, some of the faults and some of the narratives that has to do with Nintendo Switch at this point, and Nintendo Switch, Switch 2, and Nintendo, the company itself, is their own fault. They shot themselves in the foot. They tried to hide things initially when it came to the Switch 2's reveal, pricing and all that kind of stuff. They tried to hide that stuff, and so that kind of created some of the resentment when it comes to Switch 2 and how people talk about it. But I will agree that there's some quote-unquote soullessness that wasn't there before when it comes to Nintendo. On the corporate side, it's a lot more corporate than it's been since probably the late 80s, early 90s, where it's just like, a big part of my Nintendo fandom came in the 90s to 2000s to 2010s, where they had a lot of personality. You had your Iwatas. Heck, you even had, before that, other guys like Gunpei Yokoi. You had, obviously, Miyamoto the entire time, which we barely see him anymore on the video game side of it. And I understand. I mean, he can't make video games forever. So I'm not having a problem with that. I just wish there was somebody else that came along that could pick up the mantle when it comes to that. We loved his personality. Same thing with Reggie. The Reggie era was, it was the Reggie era. Iwata as well. Those guys were just different as studio head or as company heads, and it felt more. You felt more kinship, a more personal relation to the company than you do with Furukawa and Doug Bowser. Like, it's just super bland, super corporate. I think that has a lot to do with some of the pricing. Yes, his Nintendo gouged fans a bit back in the day, kind of doing the Disney Vault nostalgia thing. Sure. But they also were a 180 from that stuff, and they did really cool things when it came to how much they charged for certain things as well. They gave a lot of value, especially Iwata. Iwata cared a lot about value, um, so it's very different there. But there's just a lot of resentment at this point because you don't have personalities like that anymore that could kind of blunt some of that stuff, I think. Um, and so they just feel a lot more corporate and quote unquote soulless. So I disagree with the Scott DeWaz's video where he kind of talks about this, and he talks about kind of the narrative of current Nintendo versus Nintendo before. Um, so I disagree with that because yeah, you can find again uh, anecdotal things here and there to compare of what happened before, but I think overall as a feel of the company, it's different. It is different at this point. Some people don't care because they didn't come up in all that stuff, and that's a lot of the Switch guys, the Switch bros, if you will. A lot of them didn't grow up with that Nintendo, and they just kind of came in during the Switch era. So they don't, whatever. They don't. None of that matters to them. But it matters to somebody like me who was around, from the 80s. I wouldn't say that I was a quote unquote Nintendo fan until probably Super Nintendo, where I was like, oh yeah, Nintendo is my thing. Um, but yeah, like that whole era was like personality overload, and we just don't have that anymore. It just feels very corporate now. Some of that has to do with just the era we live in today, where they stopped E3s and stuff like that, things that add personality to a company, and they just kind of blandly put out videos on their YouTube page. And but even like the thing that I used to look really forward to, uh, and I still do, obviously, because I like new announcements. The Nintendo Directs, they had so much more personality before than they do today. Now it's just like corporate-y, information, which we all like information. We like to get to the games, but there's just no soul to them anymore. So there is a difference there. But I think there's a lot of unfair criticism when it comes to Nintendo because, obviously the algorithm loves this stuff. That's one of the things that just, does well on this website, is anti-Nintendo stuff. At this point, I think during the Wii U era, even then it was like, yeah, sure, people dunked on Nintendo at that point, but the videos, they just didn't hit the same. People, tend to not like something that does well for too long. A resentment, instantiates, and that's part of it. I'm not saying that's the whole thing. There are valid criticisms, as I've said, and I said over and over again. But I know people who will disagree with this video will forget that I'm saying these things, and they'll just only point out, things that make my argument look like it's just a defense for Nintendo argument, which is, that's the nature of the beast. That's how this thing works. They'll leave that part out of any criticism. Even, people that subscribe to me, they won't hear my defense of Nintendo. They're only hear the criticism. That's just, I guess that's human nature. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's really crazy. Because people expect Nintendo to be this cheapest, but they also wanted them to have more power. So you can't be the cheapest and be a super powerful little tablet device, and do what it does. I mean, Switch 2 is pretty powerful, especially for its form factor device. But it's in an area where it won't get credit enough for that. But it also is expensive, or more expensive because of that, and it'll get the knocks for being expensive. And it's just like you can't really win at that point. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on that. What do you guys think? Do you think there's a lot of unfair criticism of Nintendo the way I do? Again, there are valid criticisms, and I've made them. Just go look at my channel. The videos are there. You don't have to go that far back. But I just think it is nonsensical, some of these complaints, some of these grievances I'm seeing. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you again for watching and listening, and see you fools next time. Peace out.